The meeting is being recorded, so there will be a copy sent to, or a link sent to all of today's attendees. It'll also be posted on our website. And today we're going to be talking about sampling and data quality. And, you know, um, it's so important to get this right. I just posted a white paper on LinkedIn last night about really just kind of this trust factor that we as researchers need to have in the panel partners that we're leveraging. The people that we're talking to, they better be real. And then also the quality checks that are put in place, sophisticated quality checks that are put in place, and where AI can really help us. And we'll be talking about the number of quality checks that Scalafai has in just a moment. But the 60 that we have, we believe is industry leading. So without further ado, I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm a 30-year full-service market research professional with stops at bigger companies like GfK and Millward Brown Digital, and worked on the client side, leading the insights team at Hyundai, and I've worked for a number of smaller startups as well, like running Vox Pop Me and working at Discuss.io and now Scalafai. Jeremy, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi, I am Jeremy Antonick, founder and CEO of Scalafai. It's hard to believe, but I started my career in market research about 23 years ago as a project manager in what was a little startup called eRewards that grew from about 10 people to about 1,300 across the globe into a company called Research Now. Left before it became Dynata, was with Focus Vision Decipher, helped Rep Data become an emerging industry leader, was part of the Research Defender acquisition. So I spent a lot of time, working on the sample side from the supply side, building, routers and sample platforms and panel management platforms. But yeah, there's some really exciting opportunities here to make sure the data that is ultimately serving as the foundation for the analysis and the insights is rock solid.
Yeah, perfect. And, real quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with Scalify, we do provide an end-to-end solution for quantitative research. It's AI native. You can start with something as easy as an idea for a study or a client brief. And because our AI has been trained on 500 research best practices and articles, it will put together for you a director level draft of a survey. Oftentimes, we're ingesting surveys from our agency and brand clients, and that's a quick upload, a Word document uploaded into our platform. You can typically get those surveys programmed in about 15 minutes or so, versus sending them out, offshoring them, waiting 3 days, having someone in Poland or the Philippines or India program those surveys and having those back and forth. So, and then field work is right in the middle, field work and data quality. And then, of course, too, we also have leveraged AI to help us generate just really rich word analyses and gorgeous editable PowerPoint presentations. But for today, we're going to be focusing here on field work. And frankly, you can be leveraging our tools, our one-click, sampling and the 60 data quality checks that we have, even without using our survey platform. So you might be locked into another contract with Confirm It or Qualtrics or Decipher or Alchemer, but you can certainly leverage us for our sample and data cleansing and even, kind of the full back end of our solution. So really, there's four key issues happening in the industry that we're wanting to solve with the Scalify solution. So one is, and I've worked as a project manager before. I was doing all of the research at Vox Pop Me, calling up different panel providers. Hey, can you find us this person? Can you find us that person? It was super manual. a bunch of emails back and forth, multiple panels, and that's just, a waste of time and there's no need for our research to be spending a lot of time on that. Two, there's rising price pressures, so we want to make sure we're getting great value for the sample we're purchasing. Three, there's just an engagement problem with today's respondents. So, we had a client praise our platform last week. He said it was probably the most fun he's had taking a survey ever, given how kind of interactive it is and use of imagery and how quick it is. No need to hit next to move forward in the survey. And then number four is a big one with the number of bots and click farms and whatnot that are out there. So we need very good quality checks. And so our solution at a very high level is one unified platform, one-stop shop, vetted panel providers, one-click sample purchasing to give us transparent, efficient pricing. The customized survey experience that I mentioned with images and one-click answers again versus having to hit that next button all the time, and 60 multi-layered fraud defense before, during, and after the survey. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
and
Jeremy.
the sample landscape is frankly very complicated. The answer to what sample supplier or supplier should I use on any one given survey really depends, frankly, on a number of variables. What country, what type of audience? Are we talking B2C? Are we talking B2B? Are we talking healthcare? So there's some things that we can do, on the back end to simplify that. But with the world of APIs now, it is very easy for us to go through from one platform, Scalafai Studio, to reach out to a very broad, diverse of suppliers. And the nice thing about when you have if you were to field the survey or even just import the specs, is the survey specs, it has 95% of what you need to buy sample, right? Usually, if you were to reach out to a sample salesperson, and they're going to say, okay, well, what are the qualifying criteria? What are the terminate points? What's the LOI? What are your quotas? And are we doing starts and completes? All of that information is already in the survey, right? So if you field a survey in our platform or at least pull into the specs, then it's very easy for an AI to go through and say, okay, I can see we're doing a survey in this country for this type of audience. Here are the suppliers that are a good fit for that. Um, and then go through and within a couple of clicks be live, versus trading redirects and trying to figure out where the variables go. All of that complexity just goes away. And then, a huge part of that with the platform is that we are checking the quality in real time. So in a lot of surveys historically, it would be, hey, let's field the data, let's pull the data, let's go through, do a bunch of manual cleaning, and after cleaning, hopefully we still hit quota, and if not, we got to go back into field, right? Since our platform is checking the respondents in near real time as they're taking the survey, by the time you hit that target, let's say 500 completes, you've got 500 good completes. That means one, you can move straight into analysis, and then two, you don't have to do the cleaning, right? Okay. Um, we'd like to start with a base rate card. I've seen some different buyer preferences. I've seen some buyers that like to play kind of the price limbo of let me start low, and then kind of bump it up and kind of see how low can I go with the price. And that is an option. Or you can have a base rate card that says, hey, and at the end of the day, I'm going to end up paying X dollars per complete, and let me just keep it simple and do that. Either way, you can start with that base rate card and say, okay, for this survey, here are all the specs that I need. And the platform, since it already has the screening, it already has the quota criteria, that's really all of the you need to go through and just confirm your buy price, enter the number of completes you need, and then move forward very quickly. When we talk about data quality, I want to get a little bit more specific of what we're talking about. We're up to 60 quality checks, and that may sound like a lot, but they really kind of fall into these three different groups. There's some that happen what we call a pre-survey gate. So before the respondent even hits that first screener question, let's say it's S1, right? Before they even see S1, there's a whole series of checks that happens of say, hey, if this is a US study, is this respondent in the US? Have they been here before? Is this a duplicate, IP? A lot of things like bots, browser automation, VPNs, all of these things that we know that hackers at scale who claim to be real respondents that are probably running survey farms, we can detect a lot of that stuff and block that before it even gets into the survey, right? So very much kind of like a water filter. Let's kind of clean that water so afterwards the water you get out is much cleaner. And then we can track the respondents while they're in the survey, right? As they're going from page to page, not just overall LOI, but page to page LOI. If they answered an open-end question, if they answered and entered, typed in at a key rate of 600 characters per second, either that makes them the world's fastest typer, or they've copy and pasted, or it's just a bot, right? So there's a lot of things that we can do as the respondent is going through from question to question, and the system behind the scenes is checking the data, in parallel to figure out is this going to be a good respondent or not. And then there's the post-survey, scoring, looking across the answer set to say, hey, did they answer things consistent? Is there maybe a trap of year of birth versus age that we can compare? Do they have multiple examples where their AI, where their text, open-end text looks strongly like AI kind of follows some patterns, repeating the question or sharing a thought, comma, follow-on thought, right? There's certain patterns that we can detect. One of the ones that I found particularly interesting, having looked at countless surveys and data files, there are some responses, even after all these checks in isolation, some responses that look fine, right? There's no one thing in the response that says, hey, this is bad. But when you look across the data file, maybe you pull that data out and you look at it in Excel, and say, wait a minute, why do I have 40 of the exact same open end or the exact same response pattern, right? All of a sudden, it becomes crystal clear. You have a very strong signal that that is fraudulent activity. So, part of what our platform does at the end of the survey is not just look at that individual respondent, but look across the data set. And if we have, hey, there's consistency pattern here, right? That respondent is going to get marked bad. They're not going to get counted against quota, and they're going to get sent back to the supplier as a quality fail. That way you make sure you're not getting billed for that complete. And you're also giving the supplier real-time feedback of, hey, they're sending in garbage. Now the suppliers need to do their part and suppress that traffic from hitting other surveys. Okay. One of the other things I've learned about these suppliers is, first of all, I've never met a supplier that said they had bad quality. In fact, I've heard lots of suppliers say they have the best quality. Um, um, and a lot of times they'll say we have the best quality and we use this tool. And there's a number of different tools that you can use for that. And from a marketing perspective, that's not incorrect. But one of the things I've learned in looking at these tools is these tools are not on or off. Think of it more like a dial, like a volume on a stereo. If the stereo is not on or off, there's a volume knob and you can turn it up or down. Well, if you're a supplier and you spend a bunch of money building this panel and buying traffic, you're really not incentivized to block your own traffic, right? That's kind of counterproductive. And so what some suppliers will do is simply take that, that threshold that, hey, at what point do I start blocking, and turn it way down, right? So you can say, yes, I use insert tool, but what they've done is effectively bypass it, right? Since we're not a supplier, we sit right between the buyer side and the demand side and the supply side, then we say, hey, we can be an independent third party that are experts in data quality and can design a platform and implement a platform that has all of these checks applied that gives you the best balance between letting the supplier traffic through that's good and blocking the traffic that truly is going to give you bad data. Okay. One of the things our clients ask for is transparency, both on the buyer side and the supplier side, right? And these are important discussions because on the supplier side, they can have some serious, financial ramifications. I've seen studies where they collected 400 completes, in prior companies, and they said, hey, all 400 are bad. Well, that is significant financial implications. There's a need for transparency. And so, we've provided that transparency and a quality dashboard where you can see exactly what checks fired, what was calculated, what threads were tripped. There's different protection levels, by the way. For certain things like maybe a healthcare project where you've got $300 CPIs and the risk of fraud is very, very high. You maybe have the strictest and you've got all of them firing. On the other end of the spectrum, you may be fielding an employee survey, or a client list, right? Where you say, you know what, I don't need to be overzealous, and so maybe I even turn some of those basic things off, or just turn them to basic, right?
We
A
also have
lot,
clients too that don't mind a bit of swearing in the verbatims. So if people
yeah,
are dropping F-bombs in the verbatims, they want to keep them in.
Well,
yep,
I don't know if this is a session I can just randomly speak
yeah,
at, but
fire away.
honestly, I'd rather see that than something that sounds way too good. I'm sure you guys noticed that
Yeah,
too. Like
oh
a
yeah,
perfect response is probably a bad response.
right,
So, you know, something that
exactly.
seems real is good.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. The client in question spoke with mechanics, and so they had a very colorful
Yeah,
language, oftentimes in the verbatims.
definitely.
Exactly. Next. And then this one to me is probably the single most overlooked um, operations principle in the industry. For most research operations, the market research sample line item on your P&L statement, profit and loss, is one of the most significant line items. You can spend a lot of money on sample. But what is very easy to do as you're going through, especially if you're fielding multiple projects a month and as the team gets busy, right? And the team's focused on, oh, I've hit quota. Now I got to do the analysis. Now I got to deliver the presentation. There's an important step. If you're not checking data in real time, then there's a process called reconciliation, where if you have done kind of the old school data cleaning manually and you've thrown out, let's say 20% of the completes, which is not unusual, unfortunately, and that number can vary wildly. I've seen single digits. I've seen 100% of the completes get thrown out. But whatever that number is, if you're not scoring and marking respondents as poor quality in real time, then basically you're on the hook to go and communicate back to the supplier, hey, here's a list of IDs that we rejected. And by the way, make sure you take those off of my bill. And then make sure when your finance or your invoice, your accounts payable team gets that bill, that bill is actually accurate and that those completes were truly removed. If you're not doing that, then here's some very very basic numbers, right? If you're spending, let's say, $500,000, on sample, and you're rejecting about 25% of that, and if your team is fairly diligent about doing reconciliations, but not 100%, you can have a six-figure loss, and not even realize it. That's something, it's a leaky bucket that can create a big mess for you. Okay. One of the things that we've also found from a sampling perspective is, we talk about buyers and we talk about suppliers, and we don't talk about the actual respondents, the real people. that are taking these surveys. The industry, let's call a spade a spade. The industry has a huge respondent engagement problem, and part of that is because a lot of these survey interfaces were designed back in 1995. They're 20 to 30 years old at this point. They're very basic things. And we said, hey, look, if we can make these surveys a bit more engaging, a bit more fun, a bit less taxing, and that could be a lot of things. Let's say, can we have a customized look? Like this was a survey that we fielded recently about tourism, on the West Coast. And once the respondent got through the screener, and then we said, okay, great, let's make this look a more fun. Mobile first, right? I mean, the mobile revolution happened almost 20 years ago now. I saw a very large survey company, billion-dollar company that had a huge announcement recently that said, hey, moving forward, all of our surveys are going to be mobile friendly by default. Well, great. That train left the station almost 20 years ago, right? So mobile is just a must have. At least half the traffic on average is coming from mobile. And if you don't have it, your data is not going to be the quality that you think you have. And then, some respondent engagements like, hey, good job, great job, you're making progress, almost done. And then this last one here, one-click responses, it's funny to me. This is, for some it's still considered controversial, but in this example here, how many visits have you made to Palm Springs in the last 3 years, et cetera. And let's say I want to say none, right? Historically, I click none, and then I gotta go hit the next button. Um, why? No modern UX application like that looks like that in the world. They say, well, they could have chosen the wrong answer. Yes, that is a risk, but that's also why you say, okay, if they did that, you can open up the back button, and that back button only works if they didn't terminate. That's an option. The other part is, does the cost, outweigh the risk? The chances of somebody picking something wrong and then tainting the entire data set versus the chance of making the entire, survey much more cumbersome by having to do, clicks multiple times. Either way, that's our opinion on it, but we also recognize that there are some that feel passionate that you have to click the next button. So we do have an option, a survey setting, where you can make that mandatory. Okay. One of the things that we're offering is, as we talk with a lot of organizations, especially those that are working on incorporating AI, is that it can be a daunting task, right? If you think about the survey, end to end, the survey authoring process, the survey programming process, the field process, the data cleansing process, tabulations, analysis, report writing, presentations, that's a lot just saying it, right? And so we realize from a change management perspective, that is probably our single biggest challenge as an industry, right? It's just too much change to adopt at once. So with that in mind, we've built the platform to be modular, and also acknowledging, hey, if you have a subscription to a tool like Qualtrics and Decipher and Alchemer, and you're comfortable with that, but you want to start looking at ways to get better sample, to have some of these, data cleansing tools available to you, then we say, hey, that's great. You can continue to use your own survey platform. We make it very easy to take a link to that platform. We can sample right within Studio, and then any sample purchased from Scalafai, you can actually get the free automated data quality checks, and it happens very quickly. Whether that happens in real time or we can actually pull your response data in and clean the entire file after the fact. And since we have bulk supplier rates, I've seen a wide variety of pricing in this industry. I've seen cases where, somebody would spend $1 for a complete. I've seen the exact same complete could be priced $4 elsewhere. We think pricing should be simplified. That's why we've got the standardized rate cards as a starting point with bulk supplier rates that are very competitive. And if you're interested in that, we can certainly share one of those with you, and you can compare for yourself. All right,
All right, Jeremy,
let's take
let
a
me go
quick.
ahead and stop sharing.
Okay, so does everybody see Scalafai
Yeah,
Studio here?
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so there's a lot of things we can talk about here. We can talk about a project record, and some of the basic information we capture, like how many completes. Is this a one-time study? Is this a tracker? Or is this kind of an always-on type of engagement? Basic information like the LOI, the incidence rate. Um, two, two, two interesting numbers that we always get questions about of, okay, this incidence rate, how do you calculate that? Where does that come from? So one of the things that we've done is built an estimator into the platform. And actually, let me go to this survey here. And in this survey, so this is a survey called a Gemfly survey. In this survey, you can see I've got some terminate points, right? So we've got a standard sensitive industries, market research, advertising. This one's about home fitness. We've got some household income targeting, and here we've got some criteria on how often folks exercise and whether or not they've purchased equipment in there. And then if we want, we can go through and we can add quotas, into this and say, hey, do we want to start from a U.S. general population? Do we want nested quotas? If you have quotas that are custom that you want to set up, that is certainly an option as well. And let me just create a simple one here, and we'll just make it on general. All right, so I just created a quick quota on gender. And now when I go into sample, so from sampling for a couple perspectives, you can go through and you can buy the sample. This is truly like a one-click buy sample. But we also acknowledge there are some specialty studies, like if you want to survey farmers, there's a handful of suppliers that specialize in that audience. So you can work with them directly or through the platform, or if you have an own, email list, and maybe you're working with like a client list and doing bulk email, that's a whole separate world where we need to make sure that the client list emails are not just delivered, but delivered to the inbox, not the spam folders. For today, we're going to go through and take a look at the buying sample process. Right. So we're on this survey still, since the platform already has the number of completes, the LOI, all of the targeting criteria, and then if we want to have the platform help us estimate the incidence rate. So well, estimating the incidence. Right. And this, chat bar at the bottom here, this is persistent throughout the application. What you've seen me done up to this point is kind of point and click like you would sort of a traditional application. But you know, a lot of the work behind the scenes can be done either through the chat interface or through these different AI agents, things like programming a survey or tabulating the data. So what the platform now is doing now is going through and it's going and looking at that survey, and analyzing all of the information and say, okay, you know, do you have, what is the true population rate? What is the targeting accuracy for that? What is the pass rate? Now the targeting accuracy, so something like as simple, if I go back to the survey, something as simple as things like age and gender. Those things are very, very accurate when it comes to targeting. Other things like what's your household income or what's your interest in something may not be quite as accurate, right? So the platform will take that in. And then from there, you can go through and buy sample and move through it very quickly. And then I will show you the dashboard from a quality perspective. Yeah. So for this particular survey, we had a little over 1,400 respondents that completed the survey. Of the ones that actually passed, we had 1,260. 151 failed for an average quality score of 92. So this was overall a pretty solid, data set. You can see we had a lot of people pass. We've got all of these fails, and then we can get into, how many were at pre-survey versus in-survey versus per-survey or different checks, you know, and why that, and then even getting down into the individual respondents. So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of options there. So that's a quick, flyby of the Scalafai Studio platform.
Yeah, and even just on that previous screen, you saw all the ones listed there in yellow, all the ones that were red. You can click on those and it will give you the reasons why they were failed. So back to your point about reconciliation with the sample provider, it's so easy for you to provide them with details of why that person was failed.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
So we've got about 10 minutes or so for Q&A. I know that there were a couple of questions submitted in advance. So Demi, why don't you start with those?
Yeah, okay. The first question is, how can we help determine incidence rate for hard to reach cohorts? Is there a strategy that other companies use?
So there's a couple different ways. I mean, I would say in terms of estimating incidents, the incidence estimator that we built in that we just did a very quick demo of is a great tool for that. I will say it is an estimator. That's the key word, right? With a lot of these studies, if you're talking about a niche audience, there needs to be some subject matter expertise. Sometimes, the client, like if the client has a software platform or a product, they may have some prior experience, they may have some information available. Um, but it's really a matter of going through, looking at the survey qualifying criteria, and just taking it step by step, and then saying, okay, is that criteria targetable by the supplier or not? Right. And the answer to that is not always clear. Is it can be, it depends, right? But things like consumer demographics, age, gender, household income, those are almost always targetable. And then depending on the supplier and the type of study, as you get into much more detailed things, like we've done some things with political polling and voter data, for example, where they said, hey, I want voters in this particular congressional district. Well, we had worked with the supplier that had that data available, so that was something we can target as well. So really, the key is what's sort of the true market incidence of that item, and then is that variable targetable?
Yeah, the other thing too with IR, like, we have companies, and you mentioned this earlier in the session, Jeremy, where they don't really know where to start from a price perspective. What incentive is going to work for the number of completes that I have? And so, you know, we help them pick a number, and we'll just see what kind of traffic we get, what sort of completes we get. We could always raise the price. So, in that case, you take your best guess, and then you can raise up, you can bring it down. So, there's flexibility there.
Yeah.
Next question, Demi.
The second one I've got here is, what are our capabilities for recruiting internationally?
Um, Full capability. So, Scalafai Studio can support very large multi-country projects, all different types of languages, including the very complex languages where the content's reading from right to left. It's just a matter of matching up the supplier. The platform will know which suppliers can support which countries.
Great. Any other questions? All
I
right.
mean, you're on a mute. Is that?
I guess I have one question. Is there anything different, or how does your platform handle when you're using multiple panels and you end up with duplicates, one on one, same person on one panel as another panel? Is
Yeah.
it able to handle that? Because that's something that we run into quite a bit. That takes a lot of manual review and labor, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple ways to play defense against that. One would be just digital fingerprinting that's built into the platform, but that's
Yeah.
not always super reliable. Um, One of the tools that we like for that, we also have integrated into the platform, is RepData's Research Defender.
Okay.
When I was at RepData for several years, so I know exactly what that platform is capable of, and when implemented correctly, that the Research Defender platform is used by many of the big suppliers, Pure Spectrum, Cint, and many others. So the platform not only can do help with some of those pre-survey checks that I mentioned, but it also can look across the ecosystem and say, hey, not just for your individual survey, but there's a check in Research Defender called activity. So
Hmm.
it's not just, hey, has this person already been at your individual survey? It helps with that as well, but it's also like, hey, has this person been hyperactive, right? Has this person already taken multiple or tried, multiple surveys today? So those two things combined can really help clean up the respondents that are getting in, so that again, you're not having to clean all that stuff on the back end.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. As I mentioned, we're going to send out a link to the recording to everyone who signed up, and including those who didn't make it today. And thanks, everyone. We'll be in touch.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks,
Bye.
Jeremy.
Bye bye.